I uphold the point of order and call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. We come to bury work choices and we want a tombstone that says
the Deputy
rest
Prime
in
Minister
peace.
will resume her seat. Order. The Deputy Prime Minister will resume her seat. The member for Sturt.
Speaker, on your ruling and the point of order taken by the Leader of our government business, as a 15-year veteran of this House, I have a very clear recollection. Of the previous opposition taking the same point of order or moving the same motion against the member for Warringah when he was the Leader of government business in the House.
I ask the honourable member for Sturt to resume.
Given our clear memory of the same motion.
There is no point of order. I call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Unbelievable.
Thank you. We come to bury work choices. We are putting a tombstone on it that says rest in peace. We want to know whether the Liberal Party seeks to exhume it. Now, on this motion, and probably they're in a party room meeting now trying to work out how to vote, but on this motion the Liberal Party has got three choices. They can vote with the government despite the secret desire of their hearts to keep work choices.
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume her seat. The honourable member for North Sydney.
I move the Speaker be no longer heard. The member be no longer heard.
The Minister for Infrastructure does not have the call. Would you please resume your seat? The Minister for Infrastructure took a point of order before which I upheld, well, the member for North Sydney has moved that the Deputy Prime Minister be no longer heard, and the Minister for Infrastructure, presumably,
on a point of order, Mr.
on
Deputy
a point
Speaker.
of order.
As you have been, it's a point of order on the basis of the motion that the member for North Sydney has moved. House of Reps practice is very clear, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The House has ruled on this motion.
I uphold the point of order.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I move to send it. Mr. Speaker, this is unprecedented for a government to move such a motion, and clearly the Labor Party hasn't worked out that they actually are in government. They actually haven't worked out that they are in government, so they are moving this sort of spurious motion to try and get television time tonight, right, when they've been telling us, and the Leader of government business rang me yesterday and said to me, we want to get through our bills. We want to get through our bills tomorrow, so can you cut short your speakers list so we can get through the bills? And then the government moves an absurd motion like this.
The honourable member for North Sydney will resume his seat. Order. The honourable member for North Sydney will resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure.
Point of order, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In your interests, you would be aware that this is a motion of dissent in your ruling. In your ruling, the member opposite has to refer to your ruling, which was upholding point of order moved by myself based upon House of Representatives practice that the House had determined a question. He has to refer to your ruling.
Minister for Infrastructure.
He hasn't mentioned one thing about your
member for North Sydney, who will focus on the grounds for his
Absolutely, I'm more than happy to do so, Mr.
ruling.
Speaker. We are moving dissent in your ruling because there has been a rich history in this place, particularly in relation to the the member for Warringah as Leader of government business, that on numerous occasions the then opposition moved subsequent motions to close him down. And, Mr. Speaker, if this is the way they're organised in the chamber, Lord knows how they're organised on Expenditure Review Committee. Lord knows how they're organised in relation to getting the budget right. And it should come as no surprise that they haven't got any answers in relation to Chinese trips by the now Minister for Agriculture and the Prime Minister and the Treasurer.
The member for North Sydney will resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure.
Thanks,
on a point of order.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. My point of order is that the member for North Sydney has lost his way, doesn't know what he's doing, and is now talking about issues that have nothing to do with your very specific and, might I say, correct ruling, Mr Deputy Speaker.
The minister will resume his seat. I call the member for North Sydney, who will focus on the grounds for moving dissent from the chair's ruling.
The reason why I'm moving dissent is because the Labor Party in government, has sought on numerous occasions, Mr Speaker, to try and get us to pull our speakers on various bills so they could speed up the activities of the House today in relation to other bills. They brought this motion on without any consultation with us.
Seat. The Minister for Infrastructure, on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. Again, the member for North Sydney is straying. You want to move dissent in your own party people. That's up to you, folks. That's up to you. Just absurd. Just absurd.
The Minister for Infrastructure ought not to cast aspersions on the neutrality of the chair. As a Deputy Speaker, I exercise this authority regardless of the political party of which I might happen to be a member.
And Mr Speaker, just to continue, and this is the background to our moving dissent, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Leader of Government Business rang me and said he wanted us to drop speakers off bills that were scheduled for today, so that he could bring on those bills and have their finish with today. So what happens today, Mr Deputy Speaker, is they pull on this stunt.
The Minister for Infrastructure.
Mr Speaker, the member opposite has been given a number of opportunities to speak to the resolution. He can't because your ruling's right. I take up the invitation that was given by him and the member for Warringah and move the motion be put.
The Prime Minister's walked out.
The Minister for Infrastructure can't move the motion be put, because the question has not been stated from the chair. I call the honourable member for North Sydney.
You don't understand the standing orders and you're a Leader of Government Business. You don't understand the standing orders that you put in place. Oh, Mr Speaker, it's interesting, isn't it, Mr Deputy Speaker?
For the promotion, but
just Mr Deputy Speaker. They run the parliament. It is the government that sets down the order of business for the day. It's the government that sets down the legislative agenda for the House. Here they are, Mr Deputy Speaker, moving a motion on their own time during government business. They don't understand the standing orders, Mr Deputy Speaker. They don't understand the standing orders. This is what you call a political stunt by the government.
The honourable member for North Sydney will resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure.
Mr Speaker, the member for North Sydney is not referring and hasn't referred once to why your ruling is wrong. He has to do that. He has to do that. Not state the obvious that there's politics conducted in this place.
Well, the Minister for Infrastructure will...
And that we're against work choices and they're for it. Well, we know that, Mr Speaker. We know that. The Minister for Infrastructure will resume his seat, and I call the member for North Sydney.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And how ironic it is that the Labor Party now hasn't realised they're in government, because they're moving motions in this chamber to suspend standing orders, Mr Speaker. There's no recollection out of 13 years, out of 11 years of the Howard government, that the government would ever lose control of the chamber in the way that this Labor Party has lost control of the chamber today, and let alone having moved to motion. There is no precedent for it. We're back into the Hawke years to try and find a precedent as we stand. And this just illustrates, Mr Deputy Speaker, that these people are more interested in stunts. They're more interested in the charade of government rather than in making hard decisions. And how ironic it is, Mr Deputy Speaker, that they had to move 34 amendments to their own work choices bill. And I bet the old Greg Conway would be turning in his old union grave if he knew
the member for North Sydney should resume his seat. He should focus in his speech on identifying why, in his view, the ruling of the chair is not correct. I call the member for North Sydney.
In my view, Mr Deputy Speaker, the reason why the Speaker's ruling should be overturned by this chamber is because the decision is wrong. The decision is clearly wrong. The decision is wrong based on precedents involving the member for Warringah, based on precedents involving the previous the previous manager of opposition business, who on numerous occasions moved that the leader of government business be no longer heard, and subsequent motions within the speaking time allocated to the leader of government business, Mr. Speaker. And of course, what we know is that the leader of government business in this place doesn't understand his own standing orders. He doesn't understand his own standing orders, and that's why he tried to move that we be no longer heard on dissent.
Will resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure on a point of order.
Yes, this is a dissent in your ruling, Mr. Speaker.
From my ruling.
From your ruling, the member for North Sydney must refer to your ruling and why it is wrong.
I consider that the member for North Sydney is indeed focusing on the reasons for dissent from my ruling. I call the honourable member for North Sydney.
And I'll tell you what, I give a little warning to the Minister for Agriculture. He shouldn't be too outspoken at the moment.
The member for North Sydney ought not to warn anybody in the chamber. Only the Deputy Speaker or the occupant of the chair has the capacity to warn people.
I'm just giving him some advice, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Order. The member for North Sydney will resume his seat. As I understand, there's another point of order from the Minister for Infrastructure.
I ask that threat be withdrawn, Mr.
I call
Speaker.
the Minister for Infrastructure.
I ask that threat be withdrawn, Mr. Speaker.
Well,
you can't make threats across the chamber, Mr. Speaker. Not even from the party of work choices.
I was listening. I draw the minister's attention to what I believe the manager of opposition business said. And what he said was he has a warning for. I don't consider it a threat, and I call the honourable member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we want to get on with the business of the House. We want to get on with dealing with the government's legislative timetable. It is the government that has suspended its own standing orders to bring on a motion full of politics, vitriol, rhetoric, the same old tired stuff that they've been running in opposition. They ran it in opposition, they won the election, we accept they won the election, but now they're in government, they actually have to make some decisions. I know it's going to come as a rude shock to the Treasurer, who should be out there studying the economics books rather than in here being party to a political stunt.
Order.
Economics
The
for
honourable
dummies.
member
We'll
for
send you a
North
copy.
Sydney will resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure on a point of order.
Under any circumstances, that was not referring to the motion, and I ask you to see if the member for North Sydney can refer to why your ruling was incorrect. You have to do that.
Order. The member for North Sydney will resume his seat. As his time has expired, is the motion seconded?
The motion is seconded, Mr.
Motion
Acting
is
Deputy Speaker.
seconded by the honourable member for. I haven't given you the call yet. The motion has been seconded by the honourable member for Sturt. The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy Speaker. And if I could take you back to the circumstances into which this dissent motion has arisen. The government, the Deputy Prime Minister, has moved a ludicrous, ridiculous and embarrassingly foolish motion in the House to suspend standing orders today to move a particularly foolish motion. The opposition, quite rightly, are incensed that the government, having not made the transition to government, would reduce the House to this mockery and rather than getting on with the business of government. The Australian today has made a point in its own editorial how this government is big on symbolism and very short on making decisions in government. Unfortunately today, in this lunchtime debate, the government is fulfilling the worst thoughts of the editorial in the Australian. So the circumstances of this dissent resolution, as moved by the
Order. The honourable member will resume his seat, or I'll deal with him. The Minister for Infrastructure.
This is not a dissent in the Australian editorial.
Is this a point of order?
Speaker. My point of order
I call
is
the Minister for Infrastructure on a point of order.
Thanks. The member for Sturt has not referred to the motion that is moved. This is a motion of dissent in your ruling, and he has to speak to that.
Well, the Minister will resume his seat. I'd call the member for Sturt and I'd ask him to be very focused in his contribution on his reason for seconding the motion of dissent from the Deputy Speaker's ruling.
Your guidance, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, but I think I was quite correctly pointing out the circumstances of this dissent resolution. The member for North Sydney, quite rightly, is concerned by the ruling that you have given that a motion that a member be no longer heard cannot be moved against the same person speaking at a particular point in time. The dissent motion is that that ruling was incorrect, that in fact a motion that a member be no longer heard can be moved at any time. And in fact the precedent for that is very clear. I've been in this parliament since 1993, the member for Warringah since 1994. I remember times when such motions that a member be no longer heard were taken by the then opposition against the member for Warringah when he was the Minister for Employment Services.
Resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure.
Order, Mr Speaker. I wonder if Standing Order 87 has been complied with, Mr Deputy Speaker, particularly the second sentence.
Of course.
I call the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. And I think I was being entirely relevant to the motion, which was pointing out, in fact, that we are dissenting from your ruling because it breaks with previous precedent. The precedent for this, after the Prime Minister had slipped out of the House, wanting to avoid the embarrassment of this stunt from his deputy, the precedent for this was when the member for Warringah was the Minister for Employment Services, and such motions were taken against him by the then opposition.
Will resume his seat. Order. The member for Sturt will resume. Order. The member for Sturt will resume his seat. And it is a matter for the chair to determine whether a point of order is frivolous or otherwise. I call the Minister for Infrastructure, presumably on a point of order.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Hopefully not a frivolous
Standing
one.
Order 87 is that a member moving a motion of dissent must submit the motion in writing. Has that happened?
I understand it has been submitted in writing. There is no point of order. The honourable member— Order! I haven't called the member for Sturt. I call the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. Of course it's been complied with. It was complied with right at the beginning of the debate, because unlike you, we know that you have to put dissent motions in writing and have them moved and seconded. And that's why it was put down there right at the beginning of the debate, you silly goose. But no wonder everyone behind you is talking about getting rid of you as leader of government business in the House. And my point is, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, that we dissent from your ruling because your ruling was wrong, because it breaches precedent previously established in this House, and that if the right of the House to ask a member to be no longer heard is taken away from the opposition, or in fact any member of the parliament, it is a huge breach of the parliamentary requirements of the Westminster system, which allows the opposition or any member to move that a member be no longer heard when they are being irrelevant, when they are traducing the good name of the parliament, when they are using motions such as this one for stunts, rather than getting on with the business of government.
The Leader of the House. Sorry. The question is that the Speaker's ruling be dissented from. I call the Leader of Government Business.
Thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in support of your ruling. Page 514 of House of Representatives practice, something not referred to by either of the speakers opposite, as were the standing orders not referred to, is very clear. Closure of member. It says the following: with the exception stated below, any member may move at any time the member is speaking be no longer heard, and the question must be put immediately and resolved without debate. It then says the motion cannot be moved when a member is giving a notice of motion or moving the terms of the motion, or if, when the same question has been negatived, the chair is of the opinion that the further motion is an abuse of the orders or forms of the House or is moved for the purpose of obstructing business. Mr Deputy Speaker, House of Reps practice is very clear. We know that the reason why they've moved this dissent is so that they can work out whether they're for or against work choices today. That is why they've done it, so they can have a tactics committee meeting. Your ruling is correct, Mr Deputy Speaker, and your ruling should be upheld.
I thank the leader. The question is that I call the honourable member for Warringah.
Well, thanks, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to support the motion moved by the Manager of Opposition Business, not because it gives me any pleasure to see this motion of dissent in the House, and I want to say that in every other respect, Mr Deputy Speaker, your chairmanship has been exemplary, absolutely exemplary, but in this important respect you have, I regret to say, Mr Deputy Speaker, breached the ordinary standards and procedures and conventions of this House. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I have been in this House for some time and I have been involved, dare I say it, in a few pretty rugged parliamentary debates. And I can remember being in this chamber when I was the Minister for Employment Services, moving a suspension motion on the then member for Dissent, and I can remember, and I invite the clerks to go back and look at the Hansard and advise you on this very point, Mr Deputy Speaker. I can remember being subject to successive closure motions by the then opposition. And if it was good enough for the then opposition to close government ministers within a few seconds of the resolution of a previous motion, if it was good enough for the occupant of the chair on that day to allow successive closure motions, the precedent has been set, and we were perfectly entitled to move a closure motion on this minister who has not learnt a new script since she got into government. It was all very well in opposition to run this anti-work choices script, but you've got to govern. When you are a minister in this country, you cannot govern this country by constantly repeating a mantra of opposition. You've actually got to make decisions, and that's what this government has not done in the 3.5 months in which it has been in office. And I refer to no greater authority than the former Leader of the Labor Party, the member for Werriwa, who has said that this new government has engaged in nothing less than a circus of symbolism since it has been in office, and this stunt today is the very quintessence of symbolism, and it demonstrates that rather than get on with the government, they are still running the same tired old script. They are basically an opposition who found their way into government because of the longevity of the incumbents, and now they are trying to work out what to do. That is the problem that this government has. It doesn't actually know what to do now that it finds itself in government. Now, come on. I say to members opposite, surely all those years as union organisers, surely all those years of delving deeply into the workplace law, you must know something about this. You must know something about this. I accept. I don't like it, but I accept that the former government lost the election, but having lost the election, you are now in government, and members opposite simply have to get on with the task of governing and constantly running the sorts of stunts that we see this morning, having deceived the opposition about their desire to get on with government business, having engaged in a rank act of deception to then pull on this stunt, and then to have pulled that bogus point of order, which you, unfortunately, Mr Deputy Speaker, have upheld, really demonstrates that the former member for Werriwa, Mark Latham, is right. These guys don't know what they are doing. They don't know what they are doing. They are engaging in a circus of symbolism, and frankly, the time of this parliament is being needlessly consumed by a government which should know better, constantly running the old lines at the behest of a Minister for Workplace Relations who was moderately effective in opposition. I will grant her that. Moderately effective in opposition, but the task is not to criticise the former government. The task now is to be a good government in the stead of the former government. And I have to say this, Mr Deputy Speaker, the longer this mob opposite are in place, the better the Howard government is going to look. The longer this mob are in place,
the more likely that the people of Australia will look back to 2.1 million new jobs, a 21% increase in real wages and a doubling of the real net wealth of Australians as a golden age to which they would like to aspire at the next election.
I call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I speak against the dissent motion and in favour of your ruling. And in doing so, Mr Speaker, can I say it is apparent from the quality of the debate that this dissent motion is actually not about your ruling. It's about buying time for the opposition and the Liberal Party to work out how they want to vote on the motion I've moved. And they're trying to characterise that motion as unimportant, but of course it calls on them to do a very important thing. And the reason this dissent has been moved is to prevent them for some time coming to this point of decision.
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume her seat, and the member for Sturt ought not to talk before he gets the call. I call the member for Sturt on a point of order.
Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, during the presentations by myself, member for Warringah, the government was very clear that we have to stick to the dissent motion.
Down the chair.
Sorry.
What I was about to say to the member for Sturt, who has been here long enough to know, is that the correct means of reference to the person occupying the chair is Deputy Speaker and not Acting Deputy
Mr
Speaker.
Deputy Speaker, thank you for your clarification.
The member for Sturt on a point of order.
Mr Deputy Speaker, thank you for that. The government members have to be relevant to the dissent motion, Mr Deputy Speaker. Obviously, they pointed this out during our presentations, and we were relevant to the dissent motion. The Deputy Prime Minister is now talking about work choices and issues that are in the past, and I ask you to draw her to the debate.
There's no point of order. I call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you. On the dissent, Mr Deputy Speaker, it is a device. Why is it a device? Because the opposition doesn't want to declare its hand on the motion I have moved, and there are only three choices. They vote for it despite their secret desires to keep work choices. They vote against it and absolutely show themselves to be the party of work choices and with a secret plan to reintroduce AWAs.
Order. Would the Deputy Prime Minister resume her seat? There are far too many interjections from the opposition front bench. I draw members to the provisions of the standing orders, and I call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Or thirdly, they can cower in the corner because they don't know what they stand for any longer. Only three choices. Cover up, work choices or cower. That's the three choices. Cover up, work choices or cower. What are you going to do?
The Deputy Prime Minister will resume her seat. I call the honourable member for Warringah.
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, in the tradition that's been established by the Leader of the House earlier in this debate, the Deputy Prime Minister is required strictly to debate the dissent motion, not to make extraneous points, and I would also suggest that she stop shrieking at us. I mean, really and truly, it's an assault on our hearing. It really is.
Order. The honourable member for Warringah will resume his seat. I call the Deputy Prime Minister and counsel her to focus on the debate before the chamber.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I am focusing on that debate by showing that this dissent motion is a device to prevent the Liberal Party being put to the embarrassment that it obviously can't meet. It's out now in a series of crisis meetings because we are requiring them to declare to the Australian people. Are you still pro-work choices?
Order.
Are you cowering because you can't decide?
I call the honourable member for Cowper.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the matter at hand is in fact a dissent motion, and the people of Australia—
Is the honourable member seeking to address the chair on a point of order?
I am, Mr Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and certainly I would repeat that we would expect the Deputy Prime Minister to address the issue of the dissent motion. The people of Australia are waiting for some serious debate.
There is no point of order. I call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Now, I know they don't want to face this decision. I don't know they don't want to tell Australians the truth. They are a party with form when it comes to deceit on workplace relations. But you will be required to vote, and you will have to vote in favour or against or cower in the corner. What are you going to do?
I call the order. The Deputy Prime Minister will resume her seat. The member for Moncrief, presumably on a point of order.
Mr Deputy Speaker, you've drawn the Speaker's, in this case, the Speaker's attention to be relevant to the motion before the House. We're hearing time and time again the Deputy Prime Minister make reference to work choices. This is not about work choices. We know that the original motion was a stunt by the government. But in this case, Mr Deputy Speaker, I would ask you to—
Order! The member for Moncrief will resume his seat, or I will deal with him. The Deputy Prime Minister will focus on the motion before the House, which is a motion of dissent from the Speaker's ruling. I've been advised that the time for debate expires at 12:37. Oh, the Deputy Prime Minister's time has expired, and I apologise to the House. The honourable member for not noticing the expiration of her time. I call the honourable member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, because I regret that in this case I certainly respect your position in this House, Mr Deputy Speaker, but I regret in this—
Order. There's far too much and one isn't able to hear the Speaker. I certainly am not able to hear the member to whom I have given the call. I call the honourable member for Cowper.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm sure that it is a matter of much regret to you and the members opposite that they were unable to hear my contribution in this debate. And it is of great concern to us that, whilst we respect your ruling, that in this case that the matter is not appropriately dealt with, because the people of Australia are really expecting action from this government. They really are expecting action, and there are very important matters that are before this House today that the people of Australia are expecting to be dealt with. But what do we have? As a result of the opposition-like tactics of the members opposite, we see the time of this House wasted, and rather than the important matters of the day, such as the cost of living, such as how carers and pensioners are going to continue to live against a backdrop of rising prices, rather than those things being dealt with, we see a childish and trivial stunt by this government taking up the time of this House. Because I know that they can kick carers around and they can kick seniors around, but we don't want to see this opposition that happening, and we don't want to see them attempt to kick the parliamentary process around, Mr Deputy Speaker. I know that the actions of this government are already causing great distress amongst the people whom I represent, and I really recommend that they should be putting their energies into good government rather than political stunts, because there is no mileage for this government pulling political stunts, embarking on endless symbolism, when in fact—
Order. The honourable member for Cowper will resume his seat, as under the standing orders the time for this debate has expired. The question before the chair is that the Deputy Speaker's ruling be dissented from. The question before the chair is that the Deputy Speaker's ruling be dissented from. I'd ask for those members, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say nay. No. I think the nays have it. Division required. Ring the bells.
Budget in 4 weeks. We've got the Treasurer here for an hour. Must have Lindsay chairing ARC. Who's chairing ARC?
Lock the doors. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the nays to the left. I appoint the honourable members for Ryan and Riverina, tellers for the ayes, and the honourable member for Shortland and Werriwa, tellers for the nays. Turn towards the tellers so that the count can proceed expeditiously and accurately. Order. The result of the division, ayes 60, noes 79. The question is therefore determined in the negative. The question now before the chair is the motion moved by the Deputy Prime Minister be agreed to.